Okay, so let's dive into this world of attention.
Okay.
It's a lot more than just zoning out in front of the TV, right?
Right.
We're going to unpack how our brains filter through this constant influx of information.
Yeah.
Like what we see and what we hear.
Mm-hmm.
It's like our senses are just throwing this nonstop party, and our attention is like the bouncer deciding who gets in.
Oh, absolutely. And you'd be surprised how much gets left at the door.
Really?
Yeah, we filter out a ton,
Huh.
which is actually essential for us to function.
Oh, okay.
Imagine trying to process every single sight and sound around you.
Oh, gosh.
It would be so overwhelming.
Totally. It'd be like drinking from a fire hose of information, right?
Exactly.
So how does this bouncer even work? What determines what actually catches our attention?
Well, attention itself has some key characteristic that can help us understand how it operates.
Okay.
It's got limited capacity, meaning we can only juggle so much information at once.
Right.
It's flexible shifting based on what's important at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, it's under our voluntary control.
Oh.
We can choose what to focus on.
Right.
Although sometimes that feels harder than others.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can decide to focus on reading a script right now,
Yeah.
but if a fire alarm goes off suddenly, my attention's going to be hijacked.
Exactly.
Right.
It's a constant interplay between our goals and the demands of the environment.
Yeah.
But how do researchers actually measure something as elusive as attention?
That's a good question.
Well, one way is by looking at how long it takes you to process information.
Okay.
Especially as the amount of information increases.
Mm-hmm.
This helps us understand the distinction between pre-attentive and post-attentive processing.
Okay, break that down for me. Pre-attentive versus post-attentive.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of like a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
What is that?
Think of it this way. If you see a picture with 3 puppies, you immediately know there are 3, right? You don't have to count them.
Yeah.
That's pre-attentive processing.
Okay.
It's fast, it's effortless, almost automatic.
Got it.
But if there were, say, 8 puppies,
Yeah.
you would likely need to count them one by one.
Okay.
That's post-attentive processing.
Makes sense.
It requires more effort and focus.
So pre-attentive processing is like our brain's superpower. It could just process certain information like that
Yeah.
in a snap.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. But what about when we're trying to find something specific?
Yeah.
Like when I'm scanning a crowded room for a friend,
Okay.
how does attention work then?
Excellent question.
Yeah.
That brings us to the realm of visual attention.
Okay.
Specifically, how we navigate the visual world.
Right.
One way to think about it is to imagine your visual attention as a spotlight,
Okay.
illuminating what's important.
I like that.
Yeah,
So we're directing this mental spotlight around, trying to find what we're looking for.
precisely. And we can direct this spotlight in a couple of ways.
Okay.
Sometimes it's goal-driven, guided by our intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're searching for your keys,
Right.
your attention is actively seeking them out.
Uh-huh.
Other times, it's stimulus-driven, captured by something that just pops out.
Oh, okay.
Think of a bright flash of light
Gotcha.
suddenly grabbing your attention.
So if I'm looking for my friend in a crowd that's goal-driven,
Yes,
but if someone spills their drink and everyone looks over, that's stimulus-driven.
exactly.
Cool.
Now, this spotlight isn't just limited to location.
Yeah.
We can also focus it on specific objects.
Oh, interesting.
Think about that crowd again.
Yeah.
You might first use space-based attention, just scanning the area.
Okay.
But once you spot your friend,
Yeah.
your attention shifts to them as an object,
Right.
regardless of where they move in the crowd.
So it's like I'm locking onto them with my mental spotlight.
Yeah.
Even if they're weaving through the crowd.
Exactly.
But hold on. We were talking about attention having limits.
Yes,
Does that mean our spotlight can miss things?
absolutely.
Even if they're right in front of us?
Just like a real spotlight, our visual attention can only illuminate a certain area at a time,
Oh, wow.
and what falls outside that area can go unnoticed.
Oh, gosh.
Which leads us to the fascinating phenomenon of change blindness.
Change blindness. That sounds a bit ominous.
Yeah,
I could be looking right at something and still miss a change.
that's the gist of it.
What?
It's the failure to notice changes in our visual environment, even when they're quite obvious.
Really?
Yeah, a classic example is the gorilla video, where
Okay.
you're so focused on counting basketball passes
Hmm.
that you completely miss a person in a gorilla suit walking across the screen.
Wait, a gorilla. I've got to see this.
You definitely
Oh,
do.
my gosh.
It perfectly illustrates how our attention can be incredibly focused,
Yeah.
yet miss seemingly obvious details.
Wow.
And this isn't just a parlor trick.
Right.
Change blindness has real-world implications.
Oh, okay.
Particularly in fields like eyewitness testimony or even medical diagnoses.
Wow, that's unsettling.
Yeah,
It makes you realize how much we might be missing just because our attention is focused elsewhere.
right.
But so far, we've only talked about what we see.
Yeah.
What about the constant stream of sounds around us? How does our brain handle auditory attention?
That's where things get even more interesting.
Oh, boy.
Instead of a spotlight, imagine a gateway or a filter.
Okay.
Our brain acts as a gatekeeper,
Right, huh?
deciding which sounds are important enough to reach our conscious awareness.
Okay.
This is crucial for us to function in noisy environments.
So it's like our brain is the bouncer at a really exclusive club.
Yes.
Only the coolest sounds get in.
You could say that.
I like that.
This filtering process is what allows you to focus on a conversation in a crowded room
Okay.
or pick out your friend's voice in a noisy bar.
Oh, yeah.
It's called selective attention, and it's a key component of auditory processing.
So like when I'm at a concert trying to talk to my friend,
Yeah.
I'm using selective attention to block out the music and focus on their voice.
Slice.
Slice.
Gotcha. And it's an incredibly adaptive ability.
Oh, cool.
But what's fascinating is that even the sounds we're not paying attention to
Yeah.
can still be processed to some extent.
What?
Yeah, early research suggested that unattended information was simply ignored.
Okay.
But later studies showed that meaningful information can still grab our attention,
Huh.
even if it's coming from a source we're not actively listening to.
So like if someone at that concert suddenly shouts my name,
Yes.
even though I'm focused on my friend, I'll probably still hear it.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
It's like a subconscious alarm system
Yeah.
eluding us to potentially important information even when we're not actively listening.
Wow. Our brains are sneakier than I thought.
Right.
It's almost like there's a part of us that's always listening, even when we're not consciously aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
This is definitely making me rethink how I understand attention.
Yeah. That's really cool.
It really highlights the complexity of attention and how much is happening like beneath the surface of our awareness.
Right.
But let's shift gears for a moment. Okay.
And talk about what happens when we try to pay attention to multiple things at once.
Okay.
Can our brains truly handle multitasking?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Because let's be real, we're all trying to juggle a million things these days.
Right.
I know I'm guilty of checking my phone while I'm walking
Mm-hmm.
or trying to cook dinner while watching TV.
Yeah.
But is this divided attention actually possible?
Yeah.
Or are we just fooling ourselves?
It's a question that researchers have been grappling with for decades.
Right.
And the answer, as with most things related to the brain,
Yeah.
is more nuanced than a simple yes or no.
Okay.
One way researchers study this is by using a technique called the psychological refractory period paradigm, or
Okay.
PRP for short.
PRP. Got it.
It's basically a double reaction time task
Okay.
where you're presented with two stimuli in quick succession, each requiring a different response.
Okay, so imagine I had to press one button when I see a red light
Yes.
and another button when I hear a beep,
Exact.
but the light and the beep happen almost at the same time.
Right.
My brain has to like scramble to figure out this button to press first.
Exactly. And what they found
Yeah.
is that your reaction time to the second stimulus
Okay.
is significantly slower
Oh.
when it's presented right after the first one.
Huh.
It's as if your brain needs a moment to catch up.
Okay.
Like there's a bottleneck in processing.
That makes sense. It's like trying to fit two elephants through a doorway at the same time.
Right.
They can't both squeeze through at once.
Very vivid image.
I try.
And this bottleneck effect suggests that maybe our brains are better at processing information sequentially,
Okay.
handling one task at a time,
Mm-hmm.
even when it feels like we're multitasking.
So even though I feel like I'm doing multiple things at once,
Right.
my brain might actually be rapidly switching back and forth between them.
That's one interpretation.
Okay.
But it's not the only one.
That's good.
Another perspective comes from capacity theories,
Okay.
which propose that we have a limited pool of mental resources
Wow.
that we can allocate to different tasks. So
Okay.
if two tasks require similar resources,
Right.
like both involving visual processing,
Yeah.
they'll interfere with each other more than tasks that use different resources.
Okay. So listening to music while I work might be okay.
Right.
Because one's auditory and the other's more cognitive.
Exactly.
But trying to read while watching TV would be a disaster.
yeah,
Because they're both demanding my visual attention.
precisely. And the more demanding the tasks,
Right.
the more resources they require, and the more likely they are to interfere with each other.
Gotcha.
It's like having a budget for your attention.
Okay.
You can only spend it on so many things at once
Yeah.
before you start going into debt.
That attention budget idea is really helpful.
Yeah.
It makes you realize why trying to do too many things at once can leave you feeling so mentally drained.
Exactly. And this has real-world implications.
Right.
Especially when it comes to tasks that demand our full attention, like driving.
Right. We touched on this earlier with the gorilla video and change blindness.
Yes.
But what about all the distractions drivers face these days?
Oh, yeah.
Texting GPS music?
Right.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is, and research has shown that even hands-free cell phone use can impair driving,
Really?
particularly when it comes to making strategic decisions.
Wow.
You might miss your exit
Oh, God.
or fail to anticipate hazards because your attention is divided.
See, this is what I mean by real-world implications.
Yes.
It's one thing to talk about divided attention in a lab setting,
Right.
but it's another to think about it when you're behind the wheel of a car.
Absolutely. And the dangers are even more pronounced with texting.
Okay?
Because unlike talking, which can become somewhat automatic with practice,
Right.
texting requires switching between tasks.
Mm-hmm.
You're composing a message,
Yeah.
reading the screen, monitoring the road.
Right?
That kind of mental juggling is incredibly taxing on our attentional resources.
So basically, texting while driving is like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle.
Not a good look.
Not at all, but even seemingly less demanding visual tasks,
Right.
like operating an MP3 player,
Yeah.
can interfere with driving, especially if the task is complex,
Yes.
like searching for a specific song.
Exactly.
But let's shift gears again.
Okay.
We've talked about what happens when our attention is divided,
Mm-hmm.
but what about those times when our brain seems to go on autopilot?
Yeah.
Like when you drive home and barely remember the trip.
Right.
It's like you're on autopilot and your
Yeah.
brain is just coasting along.
Exactly.
But is that even considered attention
Mm-hmm.
if you're barely aware of what you're doing?
It's a great example of automatic processing,
Okay.
where highly practiced tasks become so ingrained
Yeah.
that they require minimal conscious attention.
Hmm.
It's like your brain has developed a shortcut,
Okay.
allowing you to perform these actions efficiently without much effort.
So like typing on a keyboard,
Yes.
I don't have to think about where each letter is in my fingers. Just like,
Exactly.
or riding a bike, it just comes naturally after you've learned it.
Exactly. These are highly practiced tasks
Yeah.
that have become automatized over time.
Okay.
And the advantage is that they free up our attentional resources
Right.
for other things.
So it's like our brains are outsourcing those tasks to a subconscious team of experts.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And this outsourcing is crucial for us to navigate the world efficiently.
Right.
Imagine if you had to consciously think about every step involved in tying your shoes, every time you did it.
I'd never get out the door.
Right.
But wait, if automatic processing is so great,
Yeah.
there's got to be a downside, right?
You're absolutely right.
What happens when things go wrong?
The efficiency of automatic processing comes at a cost.
Uh-oh.
Because we're not consciously monitoring these tasks.
Right.
We're more prone to errors, what are called action slips.
Action slips like when you put the cereal in the fridge and the milk in the cupboard.
The classic
I've
example.
totally done that.
It's a prime example of automatic processing gone wrong.
Yeah.
You're so used to putting things away
Right.
that you don't pay close attention, and your brain defaults to the most familiar routine.
So our brains are like well-intentioned but sometimes clumsy assistants.
Yes.
They're trying to help, but occasionally they make a real mess of things.
That's a perfect description.
Thanks.
And these action slips are more likely to happen when we're tired, stressed, or distracted.
Oh, okay.
It's like our attentional budget is already stretched thin,
Right.
and our subconscious team isn't working at its best.
So basically when our attention budget is running low,
Mm-hmm.
our brains start cutting corners, and that's when those silly mistakes happen.
Precisely. And it's not just about being more careful or paying closer attention. It's about understanding the underlying cognitive processes
Right.
that contribute to these errors,
Uh-huh.
so we can design systems that are more resilient to human fallibility.
That's a great point. It's not just about blaming ourselves for being absent-minded.
Right.
It's about recognizing the inherent limitations of our attentional systems
Exactly.
and finding ways to work with them.
Yes.
Well, I have to say this deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think about all the complex processes happening beneath the surface of our awareness,
Right.
guiding our attention and shaping our experiences.
And we've seen how these seemingly abstract concepts
Yeah.
have very real implications in our daily lives, from driving safely to avoiding those embarrassing action slips.
It's a good reminder that our attention is a powerful but limited resource,
Yes,
and we need to use it wisely.
absolutely.
But I'm curious, what are some of the ways that automatic processing can go wrong?
Okay,
Are there different types of action slips?
that's a great question. It turns out there's a whole classification system for action slips,
Really?
and it reveals a lot about the inner workings of our automatic processing systems.
Huh.
A prominent researcher in this field, Donald Norma, proposed a schema-based explanation for action slips.
Schema-based sounds fancy.
It's actually quite intuitive. Think of a schema as a mental framework for a
Mhm.
specific situation or action.
Right.
For instance, you have a schema for making coffee,
Uh-huh.
brushing your teeth, or driving to work.
Okay, so it's like a mental script for common routines.
Exactly, and these schemas can sometimes get triggered inappropriately,
Okay.
leading to action slips.
Oh, no.
For example, you might be heading to the kitchen to grab a drink,
Yeah,
but your going to work schema gets activated,
right?
and you end up grabbing your car keys instead.
Oh, I've totally done that.
Right.
Like my brain is already halfway out the door before I even realize what I'm doing.
Exactly.
But why does this happen?
It's a combination of factors: fatigue, distraction, stress.
Okay.
All of these can weaken our conscious control
Yeah,
and allow those automatic schemas to take over.
right.
And as we discussed earlier, the less we monitor our actions,
Uh-huh.
the more likely those slips are to occur.
So it's like our attentional budget is depleted and our schema script writers are just making stuff up as they go along.
A hilarious but accurate description.
Okay, cool.
And speaking of depleted attention,
Yeah.
let's circle back to the real-world challenge of driving,
Right.
where these slips can have serious consequences.
Right, driving.
Yes.
We've already talked about how texting while driving is a big no-no.
Mm-hmm.
And even hands-free calls can be risky.
Right.
But you were about to say something about visual attention and driving, right?
Exactly. Remember, change your blindness.
Yes.
That inability to notice changes in our visual environment, even when they're obvious.
Uh-huh.
Well, research has shown that change blindness is amplified in driving situations.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
So even if I'm looking straight ahead, I could miss something important.
It's possible, especially if your attention is elsewhere.
Yep.
Think about all the distractions: drivers, face,
Yep.
billboards, traffic lights, other cars, pedestrians.
Right,
Our brains have to constantly filter and prioritize information.
right.
And sometimes things slip through the cracks.
This is making me a little nervous.
Yeah.
So what can we do to combat this driving change blindness?
Well, awareness is key.
Okay.
Knowing that it's a possibility
Right.
can make us more vigilant drivers.
Uh-huh.
But researchers are also exploring design solutions
Oh, okay.
to help grab drivers' attention more effectively.
Like what, redesigned dashboards?
Yeah.
Brighter lights.
One promising avenue is exploring the use of more distinctive brake lights.
Okay.
For example, some researchers are experimenting with brake lights that flash or change color.
That's interesting. Why would that be more effective than just regular red brake lights?
Because red is already so prevalent in driving environments. Taillights, stop signs, traffic signals.
Right.
Our brains might not register a change in red as quickly as a change to a less common color like yellow or blue.
So it's like giving our visual attention a much-needed wake-up call.
Exactly.
Hey, brain, pay attention.
Yes.
This is important.
And this highlights the importance of applying cognitive psychology principles to real-world problems.
Right?
By understanding how our attention works,
Yeah.
we can design safer and more user-friendly environments.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least.
I agree.
It's amazing to think about all the complex processes happening beneath the surface of our awareness,
Right.
guiding our attention and shaping our experiences.
And it's not just about being more careful or paying closer attention, right?
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying cognitive processes that contribute to these errors,
Yeah,
so we can design systems that are more resilient to human fallibility.
that's a great point.
Yeah.
It's not just about blaming ourselves for being absent-minded.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing the inherent limitations of our attentional systems
Yes,
and finding ways to work with them.
exactly.
So I guess that's like a good takeaway for all of us.
Yes, definitely.
We've learned that attention is this like precious resource. It's easily diverted, prone to errors.
Mm-hmm.
But we've also seen how understanding its limitations
Yeah,
can empower us to be more mindful individuals,
absolutely.
like in our everyday lives.
Yes, it's a reminder to be present, to appreciate the power of our attention, and to use it wisely.
Right.
After all, our attention shapes not only what we see and hear, but also how we experience and interact with the world.
So true. Well, I think it's time for me to put down my phone, disconnect from the constant stream of information.
Yeah, good idea.
Maybe even do some mindfulness meditation.
Mm-hmm.
This deep dive has definitely given me a new appreciation for the power of attention.
I'm so glad.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of attention.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you, and to our listeners, keep those mental spotlights focused and remember the world is full of amazing things waiting to be discovered if we just pay attention.